Hosea chapter 8. Now, Hosea chapter 8 has a slight turn that describes how far the northern kingdom would have gone. And these are the charges that God has against Israel. And so Israel here would mean the northern kingdom. That's the attention that's been paid so far. So in chapter 8, it says, set the trumpet. Now, the word trumpet here is shofar. As you know, the people of old, they don't blow trumpets. They blow the horn of the ram or a horn of animals. Put to your mouth, set the trumpet to your mouth. This is to blow, and you'll come like an eagle. Come like an eagle against the house of the Lord. When we talk about the house of the Lord, we're talking about the temple. This is the time the temple is still there. Okay? And this is about the charge against them. And why is this happening? Sounding the trumpet, and it's coming fast because they have overlooked. Transgress will be overlooked. Overlook means it's there, but they couldn't be bothered, right? And this is about covenant. God made a covenant with Israel at the time at Mount Sinai, and rebelled against my law. Rebel means to go against, and this is now intentional. To revolt, right? Revolt against my Torah. God then describes what they would do. Israel will cry to me at that time. And to cry literally is to call out for help. This is to call out for help. When this thing happens, Israel will call out for help and says, my God, we know you. But verse 3, while Israel has rejected the good. Now, the word reject is like transgressed here or rebel. These are all intentional actions, right? Rejected, to cast off. Don't want the good. Basically, that's what it means. The enemy will pursue him. And when we talk about him, this is singular. It is to do with Israel, right? This is how it's used. Okay, so it's all about Israel, the northern kingdom. The next set of verses is 4 to 6. In 4 to 6, this is what God says about Israel. They set up kings, means they appoint kings. But then God says, that's not done by me. They made rulers, right? Rulers, people who turn to them for direction. But I did not acknowledge them. Acknowledge means to know them. In the Bible, the word know has a few meanings, but no. God says, I don't know them. And then it goes on from there. Silver and gold, they made idols for themselves. And this is important. The moment you see this reminds you of the golden calf, right? At Mount Sinai, at Sinai. That they might be cut off. Now, why are they cut off? Literally cut off from God, because God has already said, do not make any graven image. You shall have no other gods before me. I am a jealous God. And this is happening, idols. And then in verse 5, God says, your calf is rejected, O Samaria. Well, calf, this will be a baby bull. The baby bull is also offered to God. But God says, I don't want it. O Samaria, and this is Israel. My anger is aroused against them. How long until they attain to innocence? Now, this word attain to innocence is kept from punishment. So at this point in time, God has not punished them yet. God has only charged them. God has only complained about them, and God is angry with them. For from Israel, even this they do. A workman made it, and is not God. What is not God? Well, the calf of Samaria. This is an idol. That is not God. No, God says, you made it with your hands. And God is saying, let me tell you what's going to happen. It will be dashed to pieces. It will be in many fragments. Right? It will be in pieces all over the place. They sow the wind. They reap the whirlwind. These are all idioms, right? You sow what you reap what you sow. So if you sow to the wind, God says you will get the whirlwind. And it's even worse, right? Even worse. The stalk has no bud. So when you plant a wheat, right, the grass is long, and the wheat will be a stalk up, right? And then at the tip would be the wheat. But God says that it has no bud. This part is not there. And so if that part is not there, then they cannot harvest because there's no meaning. There is no wheat to harvest. If there is no wheat to harvest, they will never produce meal. And if they should produce meal, foreigners would eat it up. And so Israel is swallowed up. These are all idioms, by the way. Swallow would mean to be engulfed, right? Now they are among the Gentiles. The Gentiles are all over them. Gentiles means nations. And these are non-Israel nations. Like a vessel in which there is no pleasure, for they have gone up to Assyria like a wild donkey alone by itself. A wild donkey. Basically, it's like a wild ass, just going to stray on its own, right? That's what it means. And they've gone to Assyria, and these are their enemies. And then it says, and Ephraim has hired lovers. What does that mean? This actually says that Ephraim has gone out and had affection with others. And that is not God. So whenever you talk about lovers, adultery, they're all pointing to worshiping idols. Okay? So the charges they have hired among the nations. Who are these lovers? These are the Gentiles. Now I will gather them, and they shall sorrow a little. What is sorrow. The word sorrow here, God will gather them, and then God will defile them a little, desecrate them, pollute them. So what do we mean? Violate them. And this has to do with punishment. Because of the burden of the king of princes. Same thing here. They have made kings, and these would be, I would think, the Assyrians. Okay, I would think they are Assyrians. Because that is what God is going to use to allow the Assyrians to come in and desecrate them and punish them and take them away. Because Ephraim has made many altars for sin. Notice all of these are about idolatry. They have become for him altars for sinning. And I have written for him the great things of my law. God has given them the Torah, but they were considered a strange thing. What is a strange thing? A strange thing means it is something not familiar. And so can you imagine that God had given the whole nation of Israel his law, his Torah, and now in verse 12 says that this Torah is not familiar to Israel anymore. And God uses the word Ephraim, which also refers to Israel. For the sacrifices of my offerings, they sacrifice flesh and they eat it. I have a view here that when they sacrifice to God, called the offerings, they were also sacrificing human flesh. And they eat it. Now, it may sound really weird, but it does appear that the text seems to indicate that way. But the Lord does not accept them. Now he will remember their iniquity. Now, always remember, God has always forgiven them. God will not remember. Now God says, I will remember what they have done, and I will punish their sins. And so all these offerings, no use. God says, I don't care anymore. And I think one of the things that we can take away from here is this. Atonement offerings have no use when it comes to idolatry. When it comes to rebellion, when it comes to worshiping other gods, God says, you cannot offer anything to me. I'm not interested. And so God says, they shall return to Egypt. Now, this is a very serious remark. God rescued them from Egypt, right? In Exodus chapter 13 and 14. Now God says, well, after all this that you have done, worshiping other gods, I don't care what you do. Maybe I should just throw you back into Egypt again. That is what God said up to verse 13. Verse 14 is the end of this chapter, and I want to stay a little bit here. For Israel, remember, this is the northern kingdom, has forgotten his maker. Now you must understand what is forgotten. To forget means to ignore. It also means to misplace. Right? Misplace. To lose memory. So you know what it means, to forget. And Who did Israel forget? Israel forgot their maker. Now, this word maker tells us that this is the one that refers to Genesis chapter 1 and 2. Okay? God fashioned with his hand. And why didn't God use the word creator? Well, maker it's how God described in chapter 2 to form and squeeze man out of the ground. And so maker is as good as the word as creator, because this is about filling and making man. So God has made Israel, made a promise to Abraham, brought them into Egypt, and in Egypt brought them out again, and at Mount Sinai in Exodus chapter 19 declared that they are a holy nation. Okay. Now, before that, they weren't a nation. They were just families. They entered into Egypt with Jacob and the family, about 66 of them. And then Joseph, the wife, and 2 kids, Manasseh and Ephraim, were all in Egypt. So in total, the family was only 70. Now, 70 don't make a nation. When they left Egypt about 400 years down the road, Israel was about 600,000 men above 20. And so when you add women and children, you would come to almost 1 million people. And by that, God made them a nation. So Israel forgot that God made them into a nation. Israel has also built temples. Now in verse 14, this could be used for temples, and these temples are idols, right? They have built places where they worship idols. And that is why God says, you've forgotten me. I made you, and then you worship other gods. And then Judah came in as well. Now, in the last few chapters, you see Judah mentioned in passing, because Judah hasn't come to the point where God is going to charge them, but they've already started doing these kinds of idolatrous things. Okay? And says they have made many fortified cities, many cities that is isolated, that they can defend themselves. And then God says, but I will send fire upon his cities, and it shall devour his temples, his palaces. So these are same words. Okay? These are castles. These are towers. These are temples. These are words that says also used as a temple, but also a sanctuary. And so what I'm trying to suggest is that these words are talking about similar things, that both Israel and Judah also did the same. And Judah thought they could defend themselves, and Israel completely forgotten his maker. And so they have been building places to worship idols. And God says, I will send fire upon the cities. I will devour all this. And so these are all warnings. It is important for us to realize then that chapter 8 shows God's anger in greater light. And he is now making prophetic statements regarding their judgment. And that is where we end chapter 8. Any questions?
Pastor Jack, verse 13, the flesh, is it sacrifices of the children and the wife?
I am, because I am not sure of the context, but I think so. Right?
And
I
then the
think
eat.
so.
What is the meaning of the eat there?
Eat it.
Eat it. They eat it.
Yes, they eat it.
They sacrifice the flesh and they eat the flesh.
Yes.
Oh, this is very weird.
Yes. Because this word flesh is, I don't see it used, how should I say? I don't see it used in terms of animals, but it does say that all flesh are animal flesh, human flesh. So in a way, I guess you could say sacrifice of my offerings. This would be, your bull and your lamb and whatever. But usually, when they are used in Leviticus, they are never called flesh. They are called by the name of the animal. But when it is used specifically flesh, it has a connotation to human. And that is what they do to the idols, anyways. To Molech and Ashtaroth, they actually sacrifice babies. Now, I am saying that I am not quite sure, because this is it's a very odd statement, But
Usually they don't use the word flesh.
Yes, they don't. That's why I'm saying that it's very odd. And if you say that it was human, it sounds very abominable. So I think this is, God does not accept them. It's their iniquity. They have sinned. And God says, I want to kick you back to Egypt. It's to that extent. It's like, it's as good as I never brought you out of Egypt. I mean, that is how angry God was. You might as well go back to Egypt. I don't care. You see the words it's said here.
But then what makes them sacrifices baby in that sense, yeah?
Oh, because of idolatry, when they are mixed up with the Canaanites and the foreign gods, the foreign gods are the ones that sacrifice babies. Because their gods, when they are angry, they need a life. So they do that, and they learn it from the Canaanites. You remember when we were doing Deuteronomy, and I was saying, God says, when you go in, you must remove all of this. Don't ask how they sacrifice or worship their God. Because Jehovah said, I don't care. I don't want you to do any of those. But unfortunately, they didn't clear the place, and they mingled with them. And at the time of the end time of Solomon himself started to worship other gods, because his foreign wives, his Canaanite wives, were the one who led him to do that, and God was very angry. And because of that, God split the kingdom into two. But the northern kingdom continued and did more and more of these idolatrous things. Judah started to do as well. And we read that in Ezekiel chapter 8. And so I think one of the things that we seldom talk about in church is how far they went in idolatry. They literally treated God as one of the gods, not the only God.
As one of the idols.
Yes. And so I think archaeology has found in the northern part of Israel that there are little stone idols carved out, and that then they have put God's name on it. All right. See you tomorrow.
Thank you, Pastor.
Thank you.